This video is a historical and artistic depiction of biblical events. Viewer discretion is advised. It was a quiet night in Jerusalem. The city was asleep, but in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was awake, praying in deep agony. He knew what was about to come. He had told his disciples before, one of them would betray him. The weight of the world's sins pressed heavily upon him as he fell to his knees, saying, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." His sweat became like great drops of blood, falling to the ground. It was a moment of intense suffering, but also a moment of surrender. Meanwhile, his disciples, exhausted, had fallen asleep, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the garden. A mob approached, torches flickering in the darkness. At the front was Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, leading the temple guards and Roman soldiers. He had made a deal with the chief priests, a price of 30 pieces of silver in exchange for Jesus. Judas stepped forward and kissed Jesus on the cheek, a sign of betrayal. Jesus looked at him and said, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" At that moment, the soldiers moved in to seize Jesus. Peter, unable to hold back his anger, drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. But Jesus, even in the face of betrayal and arrest, showed mercy. He said, "Put your sword back in its place. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword." Then he touched the servant's ear and healed him. The soldiers bound Jesus and led him away. His disciples, terrified, fled into the night. The man they had followed for years, the one they believed to be the Messiah, was now in chains. Jesus was taken to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. Inside, the chief priests and elders had gathered for a trial in the dead of night. They brought forward false witnesses who accused Jesus of blasphemy, twisting his words. One stood up and said, "He claimed he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days." Another said, "He calls himself the Son of God." The high priest stood and demanded, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" Jesus replied, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." At this, the high priest tore his robes and shouted, "Blasphemy! What further need do we have of witnesses?" The council declared Jesus guilty and sentenced him to death. Meanwhile, outside in the courtyard, Peter stood by a fire, trying to blend into the crowd. A servant girl saw him and said, "You were with Jesus of Galilee." Peter quickly denied it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Peter cursed and swore, "I do not know the man." And immediately, a rooster crowed. Peter remembered Jesus' words, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." A second time, someone pointed at him. This man was with Jesus. Peter denied again. And then, a third time, a bystander said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." As morning came, the religious leaders took Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. They needed Roman approval for execution. Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You say so." Pilate knew Jesus was innocent, but the crowd had been stirred up by the chief priests. They shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate tried to reason with them. "Why? What crime has he committed?" But they only shouted louder, "Crucify him!" Seeing that a riot was about to break out, Pilate took water and washed his hands before the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." The people replied, "Let his blood be on us and our children." Then Jesus was scourged, whipped brutally by Roman soldiers. They mocked him, placed a crown of thorns on his head, and dressed him in a purple robe, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him, struck him, and led him to be crucified. As Jesus carried his cross, he stumbled under the weight. The soldiers seized a man named Simon of Cyrene and forced him to carry the cross for Jesus. When they reached Golgotha, the place of the skull, they nailed Jesus to the cross. Above his head, a sign was placed, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." 2 criminals were crucified beside him, one on his right and one on his left. The crowd mocked him, saying, "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." One of the criminals joined in the mocking, but the other rebuked him. "Do you not fear God? We are punished justly, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned to Jesus and said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus looked at him and said, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." For hours, darkness covered the land. Then Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The weight of the world's sins was upon him. Finally, he said, "It is finished." And he breathed his last. The earth shook. The temple curtain was torn in two, from top to bottom. Graves opened, and many saints who had died were raised to life. A Roman centurion, witnessing it all, declared, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Jesus was taken down from the cross and laid in a tomb owned by Joseph of Arimathea. A large stone was rolled in front of the entrance, and guards were placed to watch over it. But this was not the end. 3 days later, something miraculous would happen. Want to know what happened next? Watch my full video on Jesus' resurrection and victory over death. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.